there's a lot of storytelling involved in this. And I'll start with my favorite story about my aunt and uncle. You're not supposed to have favorites, but I have a favorite aunt and uncle. And I associate them with Pesach because my mom's sister, Jody, she married a man named Chaim, and he's the youngest of 6, and they escaped the reign of Nasser in Egypt. And to their family, all 6 of the siblings, once their parents were gone, one of the greatest mitzvahs and joys and gatherings that they would ever undertake was Seder, one night of Seder, and that night of Seder was hosted at their home with over 90 people every year. So I grew up at the Mizrahi family Seder, and they were the ones who inspired me to be a real do-it-yourself Jew as they made their own Haggadah and all that. So they're definitely sources of joy for me. They started dating when they were very young, like undergrads, met each other in San Diego. And on their second date, Uncle Chaim took my Aunt Jody out for some sort of like a, walk around town, like they went downtown to hang out. And he said, while we're at it, I'd love a sweet. I'd love to go get a bite of ice cream. There's a scoop. And she said, well, no, we can't. And he said, what do you mean we can't? And she said, well, I had ice cream earlier today. And he said, yeah, right, yeah. Well, we're adults. And she said, no, I had ice cream earlier today. I can't have ice cream twice a day. And he said, why? Is it like an allergy situation? Is it like a religious thing I'm not aware of? She said, no, because, you can't have ice cream twice in a day. Right? And she realized in that moment at like the age of 20, for the very first time in her life, that it had just been a rule that her parents had made in their household that they'd stuck to very, very seriously, that you could not have ice cream twice a day. And here she was 3 years into an undergraduate experience, a world away from home, and she was still not eating ice cream twice a day. I don't know what they did that day with that date, but she did discover something new about the universe and about parents and about rules and how seriously rules can stick. I imagine you're maybe thinking of some rules in your household, either rules that you make up for your own children and your own sanity, rules that your parents made up and made you stick to. The rules of Passover are by and large not just minhag, not just custom, not just handed down from parent to parent, although there are some, right? The way that you do Seder, the customs that you do around the Seder table, many of those are probably passed down. The tune that you do probably for, I don't know, anyone have a very special tune that they simply cannot do without because, that's what their dad did, that's what their Zaidi did, that's what their family did. That's not halacha, right? That's minhag, but it's serious minhag to the point that if you don't do it, like it really feels as though you weren't yatzah in both ways, both that you come out of your obligation, also yatzah like mimitzrayim. I think that's an interesting notion of yotze. Have you come out of your obligation for anything regarding Pesach? Because of course it's got such a beautiful connection with this Exodus idea of actually going out. So what's the most important obligation in the food universe on Pesach? You must eat matzah, and you gotta love it. You should enter it hungry for it, and you've got to eat it. And that matzah, much to the chagrin of my children who love Yehuda's gluten-free matzah, and it must be more than them because like the price is driven up every year. Anyone else like it? It tastes like potato chips. It's so good. Much to their chagrin, that tapioca starch-based matzah is not matzah. Matzah is something specific. So I'm going to pass these sheets. Like I said, mostly off the sheet. For those who are following along online or listening later, this will be attached. I didn't send out the sheet because our office staff experienced the freedom of not working this week, and I did not organize this early enough to send it like last week. So this will go as an attachment to the podcast. Okay, so what is matzah made out of? It's made out of these grains. So in the Mishnah in Pesachim, so in the earlier layer of our rabbinic wisdom, we learned that there are 5 different types of grains. Elu devarim shadam. So these are the things that a person yotze, you can go out of your obligation, bahen yedei chovato b'Pesach, when it comes to their obligation on Passover. What are the 5 grains? Barley, spelt, it's on your sheet, rye, wheat, and oats. And how did you remember that? Did you look at the sheet? Do you have a mnemonic? I have a mnemonic. Anyone else have a mnemonic for it? A way to remember it? It's brows. Reb Shlomo Zacharov taught that to me. So it's barley, rye, oats, wheat, spelt. So like eyebrows, brows. The brows, those are the grains. Mishnah says it has to be, in order to have fulfilled your obligation to eat it, is no tapioca on that list, okay? No potato starch on that list. It has to be these grains, and that's how you go out of your obligation to consume matzah. It's not an obligation to make matzah, it's an obligation to consume matzah. Okay, then we get to the Talmudic layer. Take a look down there. Already we're in a discussion of Kitniyot, these other types of things that are not those grains. But what's important here is not we're to skip over that first part that speak about this idea of orez, these rices and millets and other types of non-grain grains. And we're going to learn about what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said. As they taught in the house, they said, Bei Rabbi Yishmael, in his house, which was also taught in the house of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So what is the concern about matzah? They say, Lo tochal alav chametz shivat yamim, tochal alav matzot, devarim habaim lidei chimutz adam yotze bahen yedei chovato. And so, yotze chovato b'matzah. So if they are things that become actually chimutz, that become chametzified, what would that mean? We've discussed this before. I'm having a flashback. We've talked about pickling, right? So not pickled, though. What does it mean? Yeah, see, I wanted to use fermented, but now we're going to get another word in this Talmud, this passage of Talmud, that also seems to be kind of in reference to that. So I think the chametz here is specifically referring to puffed up or leavened. These are the things by which they are leavened. Okay, but then yatsu elu she'ein ba'in lidei chimutz ela lidei sirachon. What about the things that don't actually, when you do something to them to change their status, they don't become chametz, they become sirachon. What could that be? Yeah, putrefied, decayed, maybe fermented. So what is it that is not going to help us fulfill our obligation? The things that will not get chametzified, but rather the things that are going to become sirachon. Look at the next page. This notion gets preserved in the Mishnah Torah, in the Maimonidean Code of Law, that speaks of the things that we are supposed to eat and not eat. I stapled myself through here. What's the first word on there? Did anyone else not get stapled through? Hang on. What's that? Okay, ein asur. There we go. Thank you. I had to open it up. Ein asur. There is no, nope. Yeah, ein asur. Mishum chametz b'Pesach. Ella. So the only obligation, the only prohibition that has to do with chametz on Pesach, ella chameshet minei dagan bilvad. Only those 5 grains we have a concern about on Pesach. What does he mean by that? We were just talking about those 5 grains in terms of matzah. What's the connection between matzah and chametz and these 5 grains? Matzah needs to be made out of the 5 grains. We said it needs to be made out of the 5 grains. Okay, what's chametz made out of? The same 5 grains, right? The very same thing. Meaning that the concern that we have, if you want to glance back at the Talmud, is that if you have one of these particular grains, which you must have in some regard because you're required to eat matzah, so you've got to have it on hand in some way. Those are the very same grains about which we are concerned. They might get fermented. So there in the Talmud, we are concerned with this idea that those things that we have on hand to make the very thing that we are obligated to eat on Pesach are also the very things that are vulnerable to becoming the category of things which we cannot have on hand. Everybody got that, right? So the matzah is what we're required to eat. It's made of those 5 grains, the browse. And if you've got chametz, the chametz is made out of those same 5 grains, and that's the concern. So what about other stuff that kind of acts and seems like these grains and also seems to act like these grains when it's treated a particular way? I miss the old days where you just shout it out, but does somebody want to, you have maybe Marshall, would you read, since you've got the microphone close to you, would you read for us the Mishnah Torah here? You can go back up to the Ein Asor Mishum Chametz.
Okay, I'm sorry, where is it, where it says leavened and Mishnah Torah is leavened and unleavened bread? Is that the one?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, either, if you want the Hebrew, that's great. If not, the English.
Okay, I'll just read the English right now.
Very good.
There is no prohibition regarding chametz on Pesach, other than the 5 species of grain. But Kitniyot, such as rice and millet, beans and lentils, and the like, cannot become chametz. So even if one kneads rice flour and the like in boiling water, and covers it with a cloth until it rises like dough that has fermented, it is still permitted to be eaten, because it is not leavening, but sirachon, decay.
Okay, interesting. So there's our sirachon again. So in the Hebrew, we get this idea that when you have a val kitniyot, what are kitniyot?
Lentils.
This stuff, right? We're given the categorical idea that it's this stuff that is kind of seems like it acts like grain both before and after. It is somewhat chimutzified, but not quite. It's this other category of maybe fermentation or other cooking change. Kigon orez v'dochen ufolim. What's folim? It reminds me of my favorite hummus. Anyone had a hummus fool? It's really good. Like, what's that? Fava, also a great movie reference. So fava and adashim, I won't do my impression, but it's a good one. And adashim, like lentils, all these things. Vichayotze. What is vichayotze doing there? What is when we have vichayotze in a code of law, what does that tell us about the list that preceded it? Vichayotze. Usually, halacha is very precise. These are the 5 grains that you have to make matzah out of. These are also the 5 grains that can be chametz. But what do we have when we have aval kitniyot kigon, like orez, dochen, ufolim, adashim, and vichayotze? What could that mean? It could mean what? Anything comparable? Anything comparable, yeah. It means that it's an open-ended list, which makes it complicated. Vichayotze and the like. What's like millet? What's like rice? Can you think of anything else? Don't say quinoa, please. Quinoa is not. But what else is like it? Corn. Is corn on this list? Corn is not on this list. Do we think that Maimonides knew about corn? Probably not, right? I don't know. But corn makes the list of Kitniyot nowadays, right? So vichayotze, so all these other things, in this piece of Mishnah Torah, we get a description that Marshall read for us in English that afilu lash kemach orez. If you go to, what's lash? If you were to kind of like stir it up, or you were to stir up some sort of a rice flour. Anyone here cook with rice flour? That would be very helpful to this conversation. No? Okay, apparently, if you mix up rice flour, I guess with water, right? And the like, and then you cover it over, okay? Vechisahu bivegadim, so like kind of like maybe a cheesecloth would do it, right? Like you would cover it up, and then something would happen, and it would look like it had shehechamitz. It would look like it had become chametz, but it wasn't. It's mutar ba'achila she'ein zeh chimutz ela serchon, because it's not actually chametzifying. It's just fermenting. Now the importance, yes, Rosemary.
I don't think the rice, if you have dry rice in the water, then it becomes a little bigger. But if you have powder rice, nothing happens. You can mix with water and leave it for hours, nothing will happen. The same is with corn flour.
The same is true with corn flour. So you mix corn flour or you mix rice flour, the powdered form, the pulverized form of it with water, it's mostly just going to sit there.
It's the same way.
Exactly. I don't know what he's describing and picturing here, but I imagine either it's left a very long time and it starts to bubble, or perhaps there's just a sticky gooiness to it that reminds one of chametz, but the passage is there to let people know dafka, precisely, that even though you might mix these things, it's not only that these kitniyot are not the same thing as those 5 grains, it's also that when you mix it up, it kind of looks like it would be another form of flour, and therefore you might be concerned, but you shouldn't be concerned, says the Mishnah Torah, which is the prevailing authority for Ashkenazi or Sephardi communities for the most part.
Ashkenazi are concerned about it.
Mostly Sephardi community. Mostly you'll find Sephardi communities upon whom the rabbis will be relying more on Mishnah Torah than on other codes of law. And do you see anything here pointing to an exception for people who do not eat kitniyot? Nothing here, right? Not yet. We're going to get to the next source, and we're going to speak about people who do not consume these things. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. Elu devarim sheyotzeim bahem yedei chovat matzah. These are the things by which one, obligates, comes out of their obligation for a matzah, and then names those 5 grains. And then you see the tiny little writing, and it says, V'minchag l'kach lechatchila chitim. What does that mean? And it's the custom to, a priori, in the first place, if at all possible, make matzah with what? Chitim. Yeah, with the chitim, with the wheat, okay? So specifically with wheat. So it's interesting. Do we know anybody who holds by that? Like the idea that you really ought to have wheat and not spelt matzah? Spelt's delicious, yeah?
So, not Jewish, but communion wafers have to be made from wheat.
Really?
Gluten-free is not allowed in Catholicism. There's a thing
With the wafers.
It has to be wheat.
Fantastic. I've probably so many Easter jokes in there, and I'm just forgetting about them right now, about rising and that kind of thing. But that's very interesting. But that's still. Do you notice the word that's picking up in the gloss there from the Maharil? That word there is minhag, is custom. Aval, picking back up in the Shulchan Aruch, lo be'orez ushar minei kitniyot. What is the lo? But not with rice or with other types of kitniyot. What is the lo referring to? What is not? One does not what? We just said before that elu devarim, these are the things sheyotzeim bahem yedei chovat matzah. These are the things that you can go out of your obligation. You can fulfill your obligation with these 5 grains. So what's the lo here? Of all lo, you cannot fulfill your obligation with these things. Vegam, and then it's going to lay out this parallelism that I was pointing out earlier. When on the one hand you have things that are permitted to consume, are not, they do not consider. Starting my phrase over. When you have foods that cannot be used to help you eat matzah to fulfill your obligation, can those foods be chametz? They cannot be chametz. If they cannot be used to make matzah, they cannot be chametz. So, v'gam einam ba'im lidei chimutz umutar lasot mehen tavshil. Not only can they not become chametz, it's permissible to make from them what's a tavshil. Like if you're from the Midwest, I think you call it hot dish. Right, erev tavshil, a cooked dish, you can make some sort of dish from them. And then we get the most important gloss of all on this idea. So this is from the Ramah, Reb Moshe Isserlis, who becomes the prevailing authoritative voice for most Ashkenazi communities when reading the Shulchan Aruch, this code of law. And it says, Haga, here's our gloss, the yesh oserim. There are those who forbid it. Skip over the parenthetical reference to the Torah. V'haminhag be'Ashkenaz lehachmir. And it is the custom in the lands of Ashkenaz to be very strict about this. Ve'ein lishanot. What does ve'ein lishanot mean in the voice of the Ramah? Anyone familiar with that language in Shulchan Aruch? Don't stray from it. Don't do it. It's very serious business. What's interesting here is that 3 times in a row, you get a reference to what you shouldn't do, but all 3 seem to carry very different weights. The first in the gloss says, V'yesh osrim. What's asur? There are those who forbid it. And to be clear, the V'yesh Osrim does not say V'yesh Osrim in the land of Ashkenaz. It says there are those who forbid it, and it does not specify which lands they might come from. There are just those who say you don't do it. And that is preserved here by the Ramah in our text. And then we have the language of minhag. Is the weight of minhag lighter or heavier than halacha? Generally speaking, it's lighter, to preserve the fact that there is divergence in minhagim, generally community to community. Customs diverge, and it doesn't mean that you're wrong and they're right, or they're wrong and you're right. It just means there's a different custom. And finally, the ein l'shanot, which is really like a serious, but you should not stray from this. And I think here he's talking to the people from the lands of Ashkenaz. You don't stray from this minhag. It's just minhag, but it's not just minhag. It's a very serious minhag. Okay, all of this to say, the people have really struggled with Kitniyot, and this is not exactly a shiur about Kitniyot. This is actually, surprise, a shiur about Gebrux. And I'm going to make a big pivot here. There was a tshuva that was passed by the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards that says, after all this time, perhaps regardless of where you come from, where your history is, whether you consider yourself holding by the Mishnah Torah, holding by one of these pieces of the Shulchan Aruch, whether the permissive, the non-permissive, here are some reasons, according to this tshuva, if you want to read through it, but I'm summarizing a few of the points here. The reasons, according to the tshuva, that one might go ahead and eat kitniyot are for monetary reasons, or they're for health reasons, or they're for inapplicability in our day and age, meaning perhaps we can discern very easily between, millet flour, rice flour, and wheat flour in a way that one could not once upon a time do, and therefore you wouldn't be concerned about it. Perhaps you should just go ahead and participate in the culture around you. These are all the reasons that are given. Importantly, there is a very long explanation about the way in which one must go about eating kitniyot if one were to choose eating kitniyot. Take a look at the bottom half of that large paragraph if you have it in front of you. They lay out some big concerns. The first is you should know that you can basically buy fresh kitniyot anytime if you were to eat kitniyot. But if you're getting dried kitniyot, ideally you should get it sorted before Pesach. Why would you want it to be sorted before Pesach?
Fear of it being mixed with something which is prohibited.
You're concerned it might be mixed with something that's prohibited, and the amount that might be nullified in that admixture that could be nullified, that ratio is much more lenient before Pesach. I'm just adding that point. But as Marshall points out, yes, you might be concerned that there were grains that we were forbidden to eat of the 5 grains mixed in there. If you get canned stuff, you also, according to the tshuva, must buy it before Pesach for a similar concern. And ideally, you would buy your frozen kitniyot, so I guess your bag of frozen corn or something. You'd buy it beforehand also, and ideally also inspect it. Also, there's a robust discussion around this on the new version of RavNet, our little listserv. Are you on that? You're a smart man. I don't know why I somehow got back on it. And so I'm listening to conservative rabbis who are all flummoxed by the fact that the tshuva specifically says you cannot just go and buy tofu. What's the problem? So Rabbi Pamela Barmash, who is the current chair of the committee, weighed in to let people know that there is indeed a significant concern that even if you were to buy a tofu block that said gluten-free, that there could be an admixture of wheat in there. It's a part of the processing, and that one has to be careful with that, and that the ideal situation is that you would go and buy an actual marked for Pesach version of the thing, to which someone else wrote in and said, just eat edamame, don't even worry about the processed tofu. Adorable, okay. Right, so all of these things are concerns that you might have if you were to go ahead and eat kitniyot. But at the end of the day, what the CJLS tshuva is doing is reinforcing a very important idea. It might seem obvious to you, but it's obvious to you because we talk about it. The obvious thing to you is that kitniyot are not chametz. Kitniyot can never make a matzah that allows you to come out of your obligation, to fulfill your obligation, and it also can never be chametz. Can you eat kitniyot? Can someone else come over who eats kitniyot and eat it on your plates and your plates are still kosher? 100% still kosher for Passover, right? My Mizrahi family can come over, they can pile up their okra and rice dishes that they love, and all of the bean spread that they want, and it's not going to render my dishes problematic because the laws of chametz do not apply, because it's not chametz. And the most important thing to me as a parent going through all this and an educator is to make certain that that very important distinction stays alive in the conveyance of this custom. Even in my family, where we do not eat kitniyot, it's very, very important to me that my children understand that kitniyot are not chametz. So I want to teach you a little bit about the history of a custom. I'll tell you by way of a story, and then we'll wrap up on this. When I was in Israel, for the first time in cantorial school, living there for a year, I started dating my now husband, Daniel, and he was living with his aunt Jenny, who had implanted herself in the Talpiot community among a lot of Chabadniks, huge Chabad community. And we went over there for a meal during Chol HaMoed Pesach. The children who were there with this family went into their backpacks. They reached down and they pulled out enormous plastic baggies of matzah. I thought, that's interesting. They bring their own matzah. Maybe it's a special type of shmura matzah, something else. During the course of the meal, they proceeded to open the plastic baggies and specifically only eat the matzah while it was still inside the baggie, and then to carefully zip the baggie back up. And only then would they go and take a sip of their drink. That was the very, very first time that I ever learned about gebruchs, which is this notion that one should not get their matzah wet. I did a deep dive, and this is a really interesting piece of history. Gebruchs is definitely and specifically referred to in the Talmud as not being problematic. Getting your matzah wet is in that same tractate of Talmud in Pesachim. We learn on 39b from Rabbi Yossi, nice name, but Rabbi Yehuda, that even if one were to have kemach, were to have a type of the matzah that fell inside of some sort of like a boiling water, that could not it could not become a problematic thing. Like you cannot, once matzah is cooked, there's ein bishul achrei bishul. There's no cooking of the matzah after cooking the matzah. You cannot make chametz out of matzah. They say you cannot make chametz out of matzah. So where does it come from? Does anyone know this history? Why it is that there are some people who would not want to get their matzah wet if it's true that matzah cannot become chametz? We know since the Talmud that it can't. So why would people be concerned? It's a real concern. Apparently, there is a responsa. Anyone know before I tell you? Anyone have any idea? Shneur Zalman of Liadi. The Alter Rebbe. That's exactly where it comes from, but it's not a minhag shtus. It's not a crazy minhag. It's actually a very interesting idea. In his time, he understood that the industrialization of matzah, biggest factory in the world for a while was in Ohio. It was a Manischewitz company. They sped up the time way faster than 18 minutes for cooking matzah. And in doing so, he was significantly and substantially concerned that there were pockets of uncooked flour inside the matzah. And those uncooked bits of the grains could, in fact, be chametzified if they were wet, which I never knew before I read a piece of, first time in a long time I can remember reading something from the Alter Rebbe. So if you look on the very back side of your source sheet, I pulled a great footnote from a generic article that had no author. It doesn't matter to me where it came from because it's just a summary of the laws of gebruchs. And do you see the biggest footnote on the page there, footnote 48? Yeah, so how many sources are there? I would say there's at least like 15 sources. It's a lot of sources there. All of those are sources supporting the notion, including the Chofetz Chaim, that one ought to eat, if they do not eat gebruchs during Pesach, they should eat it on the 8th day. And the prevailing reason that they ought to eat it on the 8th day is to be very sure that we signify to those people who might have seen people avoiding gebrukst, or who might have been living and neighbors of other people who are eating gebrukst, that gebrukst is not chametz, right? Gebrukst is not chametz. Because even though we might have some concerns about it, ultimately you're allowed to do it. So on that 8th day, there's a little bit of a departure from what we do the other 7 days, l'shem chinuch, for the sake of educating oneself and the next generation, that there is no such thing as wetting matzah and creating chametz for the most part. We really are not concerned about it. We're just being really strict the other 7 days. I'm not telling you it's what I do, and I'm not telling you that it's what you should do, but I'm saying that hypothetically speaking, I'm not telling you it's what you should do. I'm not even telling you it's what I do. I'm just saying that hypothetically speaking, if one wanted to go about reincorporating this idea of eating kitniyot into their Pesach practice, one beautiful place from which we could lift and apply ritual is from this ritual of gebrukst. I think the notion of adding in kitniyot, eating kitniyot, say having your own sushi fest on the last day, is a beautiful potential custom, because what it does is have the effect of letting the next generation know that you can eat ice cream more than once a day, so to speak, right? That's the idea. We want to make sure that we're very clear. And it's hard, it's easy kind of slip into a chumrah mode, into a stringency mode. But we don't want to just slip into a stringency mode on Pesach. We want to be beautiful and multifaceted and layered in the way that we recount our history, including the things that we really, really, really can't eat, min haTorah, from the Torah, and these things that our families picked up as customs along the way as extra stringencies. So if one were to go about and reincorporate kitniyot, this is one really intentional way that you could do it, reflecting another very interesting piece of Pesach eating history.